Hello, listener. I want to remind you to check out my new Ultra Tri-Fest coming to Whistler, British Columbia in August 2025. It has 5 racing formats to choose from, and the feature event will be the new Ultra 515 Worldwide Championships, in which racers from every 515 race in the world may attend. Get all the details at ultratrifestcanada.com, and feel free to contact me personally with any questions.
You're listening to 515, the Ultra Podcast, the show that invites you into the lives of people who make up the Ultra family. Here's your host for these conversations, Larry Ryan.
Thanks, MJ. Today's episode is the broadcast of the special event AMA I hosted with Steve King a few weeks ago over Zoom. Everyone loves Steve, and this is your chance to get to know a little more about him. Thanks to everyone who joined us and asked your questions. Just before we get to Steve, I wanted to take a minute to talk directly to you about this podcast. Earlier this year, 515 the Ultra Podcast was downloaded in the Cook Islands, which was the 100th country in the world that has downloads. That's just insane. It amazes me that people in over 100 countries listen to this. First of all, because you must have an understanding of English. It's not like I have translations. And secondly, because we all know how niche the Ultraman community is. So another milestone was recently reached, and I have to say once again that I am just blown away. It's because of listeners like you who tell their friends to listen that the podcast has grown. So I really must thank you, and also ask that you continue to be my advocate to your Ultra and Ironman friends. Despite reaching this new milestone, I'm sure that there are untapped Ironman fanatics out there who would also find this podcast interesting. So, what is this new milestone, you're asking? 2,000. 2,000! This little podcast with its amazing guests that tell stories about their lives and their ultra adventures has now been downloaded from 2,000 different cities in the world. How crazy is that? If you've been here from the beginning, subscribe to the feed and listen to every episode, I truly appreciate you, and I am sure that I owe you a debt of gratitude for sharing this with your friends. And if you are new to 515, I appreciate you as well, because I know that people have lots of choices when it comes to podcasts. It is said that there are now over 5 million podcasts out there. The fact that you take the time to listen to me and my guests while doing those long workouts, it's not something that I take lightly. I know that you choose to spend your time with this podcast, and that is why I do my best to produce the best sounding product possible when I spend time creating this. People ask me if it takes a long time to put one of these things together, and the answer is yes. But I get to speak with these amazing people and catch up with old friends, so it's also fulfilling and fun. I know it could all be gone at any moment when the next shiny thing comes along, so please, whether you are new or you've been here since the beginning, please do not hesitate to reach out to tell me how I can be better or who I need to have on the show. 2,000 cities in over 100 countries is truly amazing, and I want these stories of the Ultra family to continue to reach more and more people. So 515 listeners, thank you, thank you, thank you. Now let's hear from our friend, Steve King. Stealing from David Letterman, my next guest needs no introduction. Everyone in this audience knows and loves Mr. Steve King. Welcome back to the podcast, Steve.
Thanks very much, Larry. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for offering your time to take part in this special 515 event where we have listeners joining in to ask you their questions in this Ask Me Anything format. I figured as the host, I'm going to just take the reins here and ask the first question of you. Obviously, I feel like I've asked you many of these questions or many questions in the past. We did the 3 episodes together at the beginning of the podcast, episodes 1, 2, and 3. You were generous enough to give me your time, and we went through a lot of your life and a lot of your accomplishments. But I do have a couple extra questions that we didn't get to during then, so I'm going to start off with those if you're okay with that.
You bet.
So my first question is, how do you remember so much about so many that you can just pull some of this stuff out of the top of your head sometimes?
Well, interesting. Just as before we began, Rick and I were talking, he mentioned a name, and for the life of me, I couldn't remember who he was referring to because I thought he was referring to triathlon, and he was talking about someone who was running around the world, or purportedly was at that time. And now it makes sense. So I tend to think of it in blocks. I can focus in on different events because I've been to some events many, many times, and therefore you get to know the players or the runners or triathletes, etc. And it's purely because I have a fascination and a passion for it. There are quite a few sports that I'm not overly keen on, and therefore I don't remember too much about. But when it comes to Olympic Games, when it comes to national championships, Ironman, those are the sports I'm really keen on, and Ultraman, of course. And therefore, I spend a lot of time poring over information from the internet and reading whatever books I can or magazines on the subject.
Yeah, and you brought up one of the things that I was going to ask you about as well. This episode will be airing shortly before the Paris Olympics. What are you looking forward to and seeing at the Olympics? Because I know you are a big fan.
I am. And so what I've been doing the last couple of nights, and I will again this evening, I'll be watching the trials from the US for swimming and diving and track and field. Track and field is my main love, and triathlon, of course, I'll get into that. So I have to devise my work schedule around the actual Olympics because I can sit up for 24/7 watching those.
Yeah. I'm actually going to be going over to France during that time.
Oh, lucky you. So you'll be able to see Evan race walking at least.
I will be there banging on the side for Evan as he goes by. Yes, multiple times.
I envy you.
Thanks. Yeah. One more question from me, and then we'll open it up to some of the people that have sent in questions and that are joining us here on the Zoom today. When people meet you, it's become a big deal. I know one of the guests in the Zoom right now, it was a big deal for her back in the day. Who have you met through competition that maybe you were a little starstruck, like athlete-wise, maybe when you were younger or even now? Who have you met that just you were starstruck with?
Probably the biggest one where I acted just like a little kid was Eddie Merckx. When Eddie Merckx was here, because we had the Grand Fondo, the event had just finished and Eddie and Axel were walking away, and I hadn't had a chance to speak to Eddie. We had had a breakfast, but really didn't get a chance. And I ran over and said, "Do you mind if I get a photo with you guys?" Because I have admired him, obviously, for many, many years. So I would say that was the most starstruck I was, but it's been a pleasure meeting anybody because everyone's got stories, and there's been all sorts of people. I mean, I'm a big fan of Evan Dunphy, for instance. I really appreciate what he's done for the sport and what an incredible athlete he is. I, in fact, watched something just last night where Tom Bosworth, who's just received, I believe it was an MBE in England, he was their number one race walker and still holds, I think, the mile record at 5:31 for race walking. And this gentleman wanted to see just how fast race walkers were. So he went to the track and with Tom Bosworth and was shown how to race walk. And the guy said, "Oh, so I should be able to at least finish in 85 seconds, one lap." And Tom was a bit hesitant. And anyway, the guy went round as quick as he could, and he was 2 minutes and 25 seconds. And then he realized, because I know Rick used to race walk as well, you realize just how phenomenal that is. So I've also had the pleasure of meeting many swimmers, great triathletes, track and field athletes. And I'm just so in awe of the performances. And I love to hear story as well. There are many athletes that have done Ultraman, for instance, that have amazing backstories. And so, and then you run into people over the years, like someone like Cowman, for instance, who was an incredible gentleman. I always liked him, and he came here and with his horns on and Amuha, and sadly we lost him. Rick was talking about people who are no longer with us. We just lost him a while ago. But a character, you get people who are just great characters out there as well. And then you get people like Rich Roll, who did Ultraman and now is known worldwide because he wrote that book, Finding Ultra. And a lot of people have said it was as a result of that book that I've ended up doing Ultraman, for instance. So people have a lot going for them outside of the sport. And for others, the sport is the number one focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I get a chance to talk to these people and hear all these stories with the podcast and share those stories with everybody. So that's why I keep doing this. I really enjoy it. And you're right. Finding Ultra is probably the most common way that people find out about Ultraman. And that has come up multiple times. Yeah. Okay, well, let's open this up to some of the guests in the Zoom meeting today. I think, first of all, I'm going to go to this gentleman who was on in season 3 with me, episode 8. It is the most downloaded of all of the episodes I've done so far. So you're number 1. Mr. Rick Kent, what's your question for Steve King?
Oh, thank you. Thank you a lot. Steve, your race announcing is how most people, I would imagine, know you. They know the name Steve King from race announcing. How long ago was it that you started kind of getting into doing the race announcing?
Yeah.
And what
question.
race?
Yeah. Well, what happened is when I came from England to live permanently in Penticton, there were no races going on. We had a charity walk and that was about it. And so I used to run that. But then I decided to try and set up a running club because we went to an event. It was called the Greenwood to Midway. It was an 8-mile event. And there were like 120 people or something in the race. And afterwards, I realized once they were giving out awards, there were probably 20 people there that came from Penticton or the area. So I decided to form a running club and we did, and that's the Penticton Pounders, and it's still going strong. And this was in 1981. And so it was necessary to start putting on races. So Gene and I and a couple of others, we put on our lake-to-lake race, amongst others. And we had our what we called the Sun Run at the time, which was 16.65 kilometers. And so we began putting on races, and now we have the Blossom. Became the Blossom 10-miler. Now it's a 13K. And that was in 1981. So what happened is because I was a decent runner at the time, I would race and finish and grab the bullhorn. And so it started from there. 1983, we had our Peach Classic triathlon, which is still going. And that was the first triathlon in the Okanagan Valley. And a month after that, we had the International Ultra Tri, which became Ironman Canada in 1986. So that was 83, 84, 85. It was by a different name, but it was the same distances.
I signed up for that, by the way.
Mm-hmm. But you never turned up.
I wasn't able to come up there.
No,
and
right.
It was freezing temperatures, wasn't it?
Well, 84 was, yes. 83
Okay.
wasn't too bad, but 84 was freezing. I'll tell you a little about that in a moment. But as a result of doing that, like that morning, they said, Ron Zalko, Lim Van Dove, as it was at the time, Lim Van Oort, they asked if I would do the announcing that day for Ironman. And so I had some other plans at the time, but obviously being asked, I thought about it and agreed. And so that's when I did the first Ironman commentary as well. And after that, a number of people asked me if I could come to their events, including cross-country skiing. So I still do quite a few cross-country ski events as well. But that's where it all began, basically 1981 onwards.
Well, you certainly have a love for it.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. And I appreciate what you've done over the years, not only as friends, but you got me down to Texas a few times there because I love the events that were held down there, except the one time when it got flooded. And that was just unbelievable. Yeah, 3,000 athletes having to be moved it was just amazing how that operation worked.
And you got to see Leon Russell.
Absolutely, yes. Wasn't that a treat? So, yeah, I'm glad you remember that. That was a highlight as well.
All right. Thanks, Rick. I appreciate that. Maybe stick around when we might come back for a second question from you.
I'll be here the whole time.
Thank you. We do have another guest here in the Zoom meeting who has also been on the show in the past, somebody who I'm quite familiar with. She was on in season 2, episode 5, and this is Lucy Ryan. And Lucy, you were recently on Chad Bentley's new podcast, Faceplants to Finish Lines. I listened to that. We have another person just joining us at the moment who's also been on that podcast. And of course, Chad Bentley is another Ultraman, part of the Ohana, and you and he were discussing how the two of you got involved in the early days back then. And both of you, of course, had an admiration for Steve King as well. So now you're back on here, and you and Steve have become good friends. What is the question that you have for Steve King that you might not have had a chance to ask in the past?
Well, Larry, I was going to ask that question. I was going to ask you this question, Steve. What is your favorite race? And then Larry piped up and said, "Oh, I know the answer to that question. It's Comrades."
Yeah. In terms of having done the race, I would say as an ultra that would be along with Badwater in terms of, the character of the event. But Comrades, I looked at the results again this year, and it's so fast what some guys at the front are doing. It was won by a Dutchman in like 5 hours, 25 minutes, and that's 90 kilometers, and to see the speed, it's just phenomenal. And trying to get in the top 500, which was my goal, and thank goodness I made it. But when you think of, 20,000 people doing a 90K race, it's something else. But I often say to people, if you're down to one thing, which I was at the time, when I was looking at the end of my career, I was thinking of what races would I regret not doing if I backed off right now. And Comrades and Death Valley were the two events that immediately came to mind, and they're both superb. So if anyone ever gets a chance, I would urge you to think about it, especially how popular ultras now are.
Well, I'll turn that into the next question, because that wasn't really a question. So, okay, I'm going to do the opposite. What was your worst race?
Ooh.
Yeah. Okay, as an athlete, it's hard to pick out a worst race because we all learn from them. And at least we're getting some training in if you can't get anything else in, like the finish line. So what race did you find challenging?
Well, I would say my worst race from the perspective of not enjoying it much and things going haywire would be the World 100K Championships in Holland some years back. I was fine for probably 60, 70K. And then not only did the wheels come off, but it got really cold. They didn't start till like 2 p.m. or something. And I was just wearing a singlet, and we were next to a canal, and winds came up, and I couldn't get enough in me to keep going. And I started to ease down, thinking, well, I'll get my mind together. And I got to 87 kilometers, and everything went spinny. I literally fell against a railing. And I remember someone yelling at me, and I said, "Can you help me, please?" I remember that. And then I was in an ambulance and in the hospital.
Wow.
And it sort of really knocked me for a loop because I'd never experienced that level of dehydration before. But I was shaking like a leaf for ages after that. And it was because I think we did 10 loops of 10K, something like that. It was, I think it was 10 loops. And I'd gotten onto the penultimate one, and having to go another few K. If I had picked up more earlier, I would have done better. Let's put it that way. I won't go into more detail other than to say maybe a little extra planning on my part would have been good, but that was certainly one of them. And then you look at, time-wise, what was your worst experience? Maybe. But sometimes time-wise, it doesn't reflect the experience you have, because on a time event, say Ironman, my worst ever time was pretty obvious. It was 16 hours, 41 minutes or something. And that was my worst time by like 6 hours. However, it was the best time ever because I was with a dear friend, Tony Davis. And Tony hadn't been able to complete the event many years earlier. I was fortunate enough to be able to persuade him to take on the challenge one more time. I said, well, you can beat me on the swim, you can beat me off the bike, and I can get up to you on the run, and we'll just walk together. And we did. And I'm happy to say, because I think she was like 82 at the time, we beat Sister Madonna Buddha by 10 seconds.
Oh no way.
But it was the most enjoyable, worst performance I've ever had. Let's put it that way. Yeah, and Tony finished. I was so proud and pleased that he wrapped up his day and can call himself an Ironman.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Great stories. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
It's always good to hear some of the not so great stories as well. We've had a few more people come and join us in the Zoom. I know one of them is at work and is on a different time zone. So I think I might jump ahead to him. He's also been on the podcast a couple times in the last season, doing a preview show with me and part of the round table that we had. So, Jeff, if you want to unmute over there in Australia, say hi to Steve. And what's your question, Jeff Morris from Ultraman Australia?
Good morning, Steve, and good morning to everyone. Well, good morning from Australia. Started my work week over here. I just wanted to have Steve's take on being in Australia last year for Simon Cochrane's world record. Given how epic that performance was, what are some of the other amazing athletic performances you've seen? Obviously Simon stands out, but are other athletes that have pushed themselves or something of that ilk around the world or at our race, and what it felt like to be there for Simon's performance across those 3 days?
Oh, yeah, I'm really pleased you would ask me that sort of question as well, because I tell you, you had to be there, and you were lucky enough to be there and to see what he did. I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but I think it was 1948, 47 was his overall time. And he came out with the second fastest swim ever there as well, with a 2:27, and then set a fastest time on the bike day one with a 3:57, I think it was. And then 6 hours, 24 minutes for day one. And he just continued to break the records. And he did, in fact, the second fastest bike split on day two, but he and Steve Ledger were like 4 minutes apart, and they were 1 and 2 in terms of the fastest bikers that you had ever seen over the years. And then you look at that overall 2-day total for him, it was the only person who's ever gone inside 14 hours. And then he ran a new record by like 22, 23 minutes on the run. I think it was 6:06. So it was absolutely phenomenal. And I think we all knew that he would do extraordinarily well. But to wrap it up the way he did, and then for him to have to do 3 events inside the course of a year in order to get to the World Championships and set 3 records in those events, because he was then told, you've got to do Ultraman Canada. And there he set a new record as well. And then went to Hawaii and set a new record. And you go, that is phenomenal. Even though we talk about a number of people who have done 3 in a 12-month period, and now we've got Shane Duffy from Australia who did 6, Armando with 4. And then you've got, I think Rick had done 3 in a year as well in a 12-month period. We've got now a couple of females who have done that. But I think Simon, he really opened things up. I mean, Maxim Nyazev, what he had done as well, just a couple of minutes shy of that sort of time. And then Arizona is a winning performance there. You've got the Peter Vabrashek, who had done a 21 plus in the Czech Republic as well. So he's bringing the caliber of athletes to the front, and the caliber being looking at the pros. And now you've got pros, Didi Griesbauer, Michelle Vest, these sort of people. Obviously, Kate Bevilacqua as well, with what she has done over the years and what she did at the World Championships in Penticton at the 520, as well as in Australia. So I think that's what's happened. Chris McDonald will be another one who is one of the top pros that has come along and taken on this challenge. And we got to remember, when you think of pros too, here's Kurt Madden, the original winner in Hawaii, who's still, and we're talking 1983, here he is, he's still out there racing himself, but coaching people, and turns up now as crew at the Ultraman. Artist Bo does the same thing. The original women's winner, she won twice, as did Kurt, from 83 and 85. But it sandwiched in between the two of those in 1984. You got to remember, one of the original greats, Scott Molina, took on the challenge. So he was the first pro, but really there weren't too many pros who came behind until the last few years. But Simon, I think, when you think of Richard Thompson, he put out that, the possibility of a sub 20 happening. I remember he contacted me and we sort of looked at, what would be the ultimate sort of time that someone could do. And bear in mind, we used to say that about a sub 8 hour Ironman. And now you had in Germany just recently, an amateur or non-pro triathlete doing 7 hours, 50 minutes. And here you've got guys now that have done, 720s and women that are doing 818s and thereabouts as well. So things have totally transmuted in terms of performances. But it also brings great personalities. And Simon, as you know, he's a really nice gentleman. He may be a Kiwi, but he's a great athlete in every which way. And I'm sure it's going to draw more athletes to Australia, which hopefully means more athletes to the other Ultraman events around the world. And as you're well aware, there's quite a few Ultraman events in some far off places, Dominican Republic, for instance, India. They've got them. Many athletes from India have been joining us at different events over the years as well. But really appreciate you asking that question. And I think it speaks for itself that a man took on 3 within a short period of time, won all 3, and set new records for each of those courses. And now who's going to try and follow that up?
To us, it was epic, and to someone like Steve, who's seen so many races, it was cool to get his take on it. And yeah, the fact that you mentioned Richard Thompson in there, and Simon mentioned it in his speech at the awards, that you've got to be challenged, and Richard put that challenge out there. And I think that's part of what we do, is put those challenges in front of people. So yeah, thanks, Steve, for the take on that.
Yeah, well, I think the other part of that is, Richard himself, he may have been disappointed with the outcome, but the point was he was sick, and yet he gave it his all. And we do have to remember he came away with 2 world championships himself in 2018 and 2022. So it's not like he walked away from Ultraman without some magnificent titles behind his name.
And Jeff, I understand that you've closed the applications for the UM Australia for next year. How did the applications go that were coming in?
Really good. It's going to be our 10th year, so it's a bit of a celebration for us, a really cool milestone. Yeah, a few of us have got a difficult few weeks ahead. We're oversubscribed with course capacity and what we run in the race here. Yeah, amazing. I think we've got around 30 people applied that have raced before, and then a whole stack more that want to come and give it a crack. Yeah, good international contingent that have come along. Yeah, Steve mentioned our Indian athletes. We've got really good support from our Indian athletes, and then a few other places around the world, people that have done some in other locations. So, yeah, we've got to sit down in coming weeks, and hopefully sort of around end of July, we'll announce our field for May next year for our 10th anniversary here in Australia.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Jeff. Please stick around, listen to the other questions if you got time, if you don't have to rush back to work. And we'll probably have like a more informal chat here at the end for anybody that's able to keep sticking around.
I'll flick my camera off, but keep listening because I do want to hear what's going on.
Absolutely. Okay. Steve, one of the people that you mentioned in that last answer, Peter Verbruzek, he was on in episode 2 of season 2, and he did send a question in. He's not able to join during this time, but he did send in a question. So I'll ask you the question on his behalf. He said, Steve, you are famous for your top-notch detailed intros of athletes in races that you commentate. How would you introduce yourself if you were one of the athletes? Please don't be shy. We know that you have a very strong athletic history. Thanks, Petter.
Well, I appreciate that very much. I would probably say something to the effect that a gentleman who's raced over 500 events, anywhere from 100 meters through to Death Valley, 135 miles, has been a BC Marathon champion. I wouldn't necessarily let people know my time, though, because it was in Penticton at the marathon, not the Vancouver Marathon or the Victoria Marathon. So, however, we can embellish a little bit. I would definitely say that I was the first local person in Penticton ever to finish the Ironman distance, that I was 6th at that race overall, that I was on the national ultra team, the 100K team, that I've done the Western States 100, Comrades and Death Valley, which was my final big race, and came 4th and won my age group there, and was 7th in the Masters in the Comrades. So something like that would be what I would say.
I feel like he put you on the spot a little bit there. That's
yeah. Well, it's hard to talk about yourself. I mean, it's
well, no, that's great. And of course, you spoke about a lot of those races back in those first couple episodes. So if people want to hear more about those events that you've done and more about your race history, please go back and listen to episodes 1, 2, and 3 of the podcast. We got another person that's jumped into our meeting here that I know you recognize, and he's wearing a little Penticton swag in the meeting. So next up, Mr. Matt Hill, what's your question for Steve?
Hello, all you beautiful people. Hey, buddy.
Hey, Matty.
It's funny. I was actually thinking this. Hopefully, this is completely appropriate. So just say, no, you can't ask that. But I was just thinking for real this morning. I was like, okay, what am I going to ask Steve? It's like, I've known you for how many years now, right? It's like, I don't even know, a bunch, right? And in that time, I only knew you before that was the guy who calls everybody across the line and, knows more about them than they know about themselves in 30 seconds of going across the finish line. And I was thinking, like, you've called so many people out on races and across the finish lines of, do you even have a count of how many individuals you may have actually said, hey, I recognize you in this moment? And it's probably in the hundreds of thousands by this point, right?
I would think so, Matty. It's a good question. And I'm not sure anyone would even really guesstimate, except the fact that if you look at some of the bigger races, if you look at the Sun Run, and sometimes they have like 35,000 to 40,000 finishers. You look at the Vancouver Marathon, between the races, they had 20,000. The Victoria Marathon, and then you add up the Ironman races and all the different ones during the course of a year. I think even amongst that, you've probably got 75,000 people. So if you put that would be probably 1.5 million then.
There you go. Thank you for that number. So okay. It's like 1.5 million people you have personally elevated their life in all these ways, in all these start lines, finish lines, and everything in between. What is it that lights your fire for like that? Because it's like, I've also experienced working with you when, you get on the mic, it's not anything other than you connect with people on a way that is ultra incredible, that not many people have that ability to do. Like, you don't even go to the bathroom until we make you go, Steve, you got to go pee. Right. And so that's not ego. That's not, it's, there's something in you that turns on that goes, I got to be here for it. Right.
You bet. Absolutely. I hate the idea of missing someone who has an expectation, because sometimes people will contact me and say, can you please mention this? And as you know, you've been there before at a finish line, even say the Vancouver Marathon this year where you did the starts. It was when you came up, we had a couple of people that have been in touch. And so Jean, part of her role that day was spot these people at all costs, because there's something very positive we need to be able to say. And thank goodness we were able to get them, because you have a great deal of relief. But when it comes to the majority of people, some I used to do spend hours and hours and days and weeks putting stuff together in preparation. I no longer have that sort of time availability, partly because I am getting older and don't have necessarily quite the same energy, but I can still do, you know, my favorite races as a commentator are the Ultraman races, and I love doing that over the 3-day period. But it's the passion is there because I used to love to race, and I love to witness the events, and I know what goes into some of them. But I also know the backstories for many people, and I love hearing what the backstories are, what the motivations are. You know, when I think of your Run for One Planet, the motivation to talk about the world and bettering it and making it a cleaner and greener sort of world in many ways, and to provide healthy things about the future for the kids. When you think about, you know, what their life is going to be like, and what are their aspirations, because they need to be inspired to have aspirations in the first place. And I know you guys did that. And so you look at the light up of kids' faces when you put on one of the voices that you mastered for the different cartoons. Well, I like to think if people hear my voice, number one, they know they're getting close to the finish line. Exactly. And then they hear the cheers, they see the flags of the nations, they hear the music, they see the banners that people have put up for them and stuff. And many times I'm aware of what their goal was. And obviously we have certain goals that it could be an overall placing, obviously, in a marathon or triathlon, but it could also be a time goal. And so if I'm aware of those things, that adds that extra element. Where if someone has said to me, which happened a few times, you know, I'm going to propose to someone at the finish line, or I've got a special guest. My mum's flown in from England for the finish to do this and that. It's always nice to recognize those sorts of profound things, because they're meaningful to the athlete. Therefore, they should be meaningful to us. And I think people like those types of details. If you're watching and listening, my mother, I'll tell you something about my mother when she was with us, because this surprised me. I'd never seen my mother watching sports on TV, ever. And one day, years and years ago, I saw her watching a snooker match. I said, Mum, you're into snooker? What's this about? Oh, she said, well, this is so-and-so, so-and-so. Well, he's been married 3 times and he drinks 28 beers a day, apparently. And so she knew all these details about the guy, and it was like blew me away. So it really struck me that, okay, it's because she recognized he was a character. You know, so if you understand the nature of what is character, well, it means different things for different people. You know, for me, if someone's a philanthropist for all the right reasons, you know, or they give freely of their time without even letting people know about it, or they do something special for their community. I mean, those are the characters that I really love to get to know. But obviously there's characters who dress weirdly, who have backstories and got into the Guinness Book of World Records, which we've seen a number of times with Ultraman and stuff as well. So I love finding out that you've got the character of the race, which presents a lot of different factors, whether that's the course or the bands around the course or where you can view them, jumbo screens nowadays, which make it even better. I was at a cross-country running event in Kelowna last year, and they're going to put the U Sport Nationals on. Well, they put a jumbo screen up, so I could literally commentate the entire time around and view the race that way and inform people how things were unfolding. So those are the things I love, Maddie, and thanks for the question, mate.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's funny you talk about the voices. I knew the voice who was Steve King before he even met you for years, obviously, hearing you call people across the line and then, Ironman. And I remember when I'd signed up for my first Ironman, I didn't even know you yet. But I did my last, going around Burnaby Lake, my last 5K would be, I'd literally be like, yeah, now Matty Hill, he's coming down the line. He's doing his best time ever. So I did a really bastardized version of Steve King without even knowing him. So when I finally got to meet you in person, I was just like, oh, thank you. So thank you, friend.
Hey, cheers, Matty.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Matt, maybe we can keep you on for just a second, because Steve mentioned the run that you did, and that was a pretty epic run, and we haven't talked about it on my podcast before. Maybe you can just give us like that 30-second elevator pitch of what it is that you did and how it's still continuing on today.
Oh, well, sure. Thanks, Alair. We did a run called Run for One Planet, which Steve was saying. It was also, Steve was a huge part of as we built it, lending his vocal chops and but also incredible insights on how to even run around North America, which Steph and myself were partners in on doing this, which was an 11,000-mile run around North America. It took us 369 days to run around North America. We started in Vancouver at the Vancouver Marathons. Thanks again, Steve. As well as then we finished the day before the marathon, a year and 3 days later. Covered our beautiful continent in however many days. I think it was 369 days it took us. And in that May, we were able to connect with almost 100,000 kids in schools, basically sharing the message of believing in themselves and making a healthier choices for themselves and the planet. We have a legacy now that's I guess in year 15. That we grant kids green dreams in kids' elementary schools. The legacy lives on. And, like I say, all the local heroes that helped us, Steve and everyone, incredibly changed our lives. Absolutely. So, if you wanted to learn more information about it, you could go runforoneplanet.org is the website.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that with us, Matt.
Thanks, Larry.
That's an incredible cause, and I know that it's still important to you, even though the run is finished, and that you have that legacy part of it. So just wanted to give you a chance to share that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Steve, so my next question is going to be an recorded audio question. This person was also unable to be here. This comes on the heels of what Matt was saying. So this question's a little bit similar. Please have a listen, and I'm sure you know this person.
Hi, Steve King. It's Amy VT. It's been a long time. I miss you. I wish I was there for the Zoom, but I'll have to wait for the recording. My question for you is, how do you do it? How do you stay enthusiastic with all the alacrity from the start of a race to the end, from the elite athletes in the front to the endurance monsters at the tail, sometimes spanning multiple days? Essentially, what do you eat for breakfast?
What do I eat for breakfast? I love that. And thank you, Amy. And wow, I'm so honored that she would come along and join us there with that question. Her finish on two occasions, obviously Ultraman Canada, when you've got someone who takes the overall victory and then goes to the Worlds and comes second overall to Simon Cochran, amazing athlete. And when you consider the women that were in the field that when she won Ultraman Canada, again, that included a 5-time world champion. So stunning performances from her. But to answer the question about breakfast, very little. I eat cereal, maybe have a cup of tea, and then depend on people like Maddie or Jean during the course of an event to get me something. Other than that, I'm not really sure what to say. It depends what's there. I'll take anything. Sometimes someone throws you a muffin, and sometimes I'm holding on for that for like 15 hours before I actually get to munch on it. That's the one thing Maddie mentioned there about bladder control. That's another thing. It seems like my body's willing to shut down until the event is over, and that has happened many times. So I think it's partly passion, and I don't want to miss anything. I also, over the years, one of the interesting things that has happened, and it's happened, I think, 3 or 4 times. So we're talking, as I said, maybe 1.5 million people, but maybe there's way more that would like to get hold of me to say so. But I remember getting an email from a very irate gentleman after Ironman Canada one year. He said, "You missed me." He said, "After all the training and everything I've done, I came through the finish. You're talking about other people and you missed me entirely." And he was really upset. And I received this from the office, and I contacted the gentleman, let him know how sorry I was. I went back over the footage and I was looking to see what could have happened. Well, one of the things that can happen is I'm being given lots of pieces of paper throughout the time I'm up there. This is what's happening out on the course. This is what's going on, so-and-so, or you've got to mention this. I can only imagine that maybe something like that was going on, because I'm relying on myself to spot someone as well. It's not just something pops up on the computer. I have an amazing team of people that have worked with me over the years, and they're always spotting for me. Look at this, look at that, pointing fingers, or writing notes, put them in front of me. And I apologize profusely to the person, because you can't just go back and undo that. So I'm sort of always sad, but that's one of the reasons I want to stay on top of things. And I get really frustrated when I'm given the wrong name. And I do apologize to any of my team when that's happened. But I'll give you a quick story. Van Sanchez, who was the youngest athlete ever to finish an Ultraman, he was 19 years of age when he finished. Well, a year or so ago, he invited me down to Mexico to do his event. And so I went down there, and there's a turn. They had to make the final turn to the finish line, and they're yelling at me that the first lady is coming, and they're telling me who it is. Okay, great, because she had been this person had been leading, but they said there's a man ahead of her. Okay, so I say, "Who's the man?" And they're giving me details. So I go on and on about the gentleman, and the next thing I know, this person turns a corner, comes up the finish line, and it's this lady, Anna. And so I am totally miscalling the person coming across the line. And instead of me calling out, it's the first woman, it was a gentleman I'm calling through. So I apologize profusely. Well, she comes up, and I saw her racing again at a different event. And here we are at this event down in Florida, Ultraman Florida, and she's doing very nicely. Had a rough first day, but her and her partner were there, and she's coming to the finish line. And we get this call out from about 1 kilometer away telling us who the next person is. And I'm going on and on about this person, and who's coming to the line? Well, it's not the person we were told. It's Anna coming to the line. It's the only time it's happened twice, but to happen twice at an Ultraman finish is just plain awful. So not only obviously did I apologize to her there, but during the awards, I brought this story up and said, I sincerely hope the next time I see you or that we're at a race together, I'm going to make sure I'm going to wait until I see you myself rather than relying on call-ins, because, understandably, the guys are doing their best they can to see numbers and call in. But it's terribly frustrating, and it's only happened a few times, but I hate to miss someone or get the wrong person. And it can happen after all when we're talking that many numbers, especially in big races where you've got a few thousand people. But when there's only like 20 sometimes, or 30 or 40 or 50 when it comes to Australia, those are the numbers. And so you want to make it personal, you want to make it individual, and you want to have the big wind up towards that finish so they can hear you for quite a while. I like to make noise.
Yeah. And I think nobody does it better than you, Steve. So if you've messed up 1 out of 1.5 million, we'll let that slide. All right. My next question is going to be a video question. I'm just going to turn my mic here, and I'm hoping everything is going to be okay. I was doing a recording with this person yesterday for an upcoming episode that'll be coming in September, but he wanted to ask you a question as well.
Hi, Steve King. My name's Tony O'Keefe. I'm a first-time caller, long-time listener. I got big love for you, brother, and I got one question. Tell me, what do you get out of broadcasting all these ultra endurance races? What makes you smile? Tell me.
Good question, Tony. Okay, what makes me smile is seeing people like you more than once, Tony. I really have to say that is one of my favorite all-time people in the universe, regardless of his magnificent athleticism as well. This was a gentleman who was in the military. It's so good. When he came out there, he was a wonderful ambassador for Canada at the World Ultraman Championships. They always placed so very well, second, third, fourth, fifth, those sort of placings, magnificent times, gave it his all the time. Him, people like Dan Bodden, Ryan McKenzie, these are the people over the years, Jerry Vanderwint, of course, the original Canadian. And Tony, I love the fact that since he retired, he's grown his hair long. He goes cycling on the Tour de France, different climbs through Italy. He's just an absolute wonderful guy. And I think that's what part of being in the Ultraman family is about as well, whether it be in some, for us, far-flung place like Australia, where they've got amazing athletes, but incredible human beings. And we've got to remember the race directors as well, which Tony has been fortunate enough to meet with Jane, of course, Curtis and Cheryl, Dave, all the people that over the years have been so involved and so inspiring, but also the buddies that meet up. As he knows, there's a group of guys that meet up every year, and they formed a team last year. Miro Krieger turned up as crew. Jochen Dembeck, Marty Raymond, another Canadian military person was there. And so you look at that, and Peter Mueller was the other part of the crew, by the way. They were one of two crews who turned up, and they do a wonderful job of inspiring the solo athletes when they turn up as a team like that. And they're just really good guys, and they would be, we all would be pleased to see all of them turning back up at any of the Ultraman races. And I'm hoping that when Tony decides to do another one, maybe he'll make it right here in Penticton. It would be lovely to see some of these guys doing Ultraman Canada, which is the next event in the series anyway. So hence the reason I'm wearing this shirt. And I know we got a few people coming who have done Worlds before, and there's a surprise entry. I'm not sure if everyone is aware, but we've got a local that's going to be doing the event that could be similar to what's happened in a number of events recently where women have been taking the titles overall, not just in the women's division. I don't mean to minimize that, but when you've got women who have led the way over 3 days to a finish line, it speaks to the extraordinary athleticism and the passion for the sport.
Yeah, I think she announced it on Facebook, or maybe not. Maybe we shouldn't say yet.
Well, no, feel free, because, Jen Annette is who we're referring to, and she has. A lot of people know that.
Yeah, okay.
But I don't want to put a jinx in things. So, I hold back until they give me the formal list, because I heard the other day, unfortunately, another athlete had to step back. It was a gentleman, Barry Berg, who had accidents twice on the Big Island at the World Championships, and he so deserves another brilliant performance. Because he has performed at the very top before. So I certainly hope all is going to be well for him.
Yeah, he's a local here to Vancouver. And when I first started this podcast, I started it as a way to help promote Ultraman Canada, because I was co-race director at that time. And Barry was one of the people that was on in the first season. He was one of the athletes in profile. He was on in episode 9 of the first season. So yeah, hopefully all's well for Barry. All right, Steve, I'm going to give you another question that was written in here. This one is coming from Dale Thiessen. He is busy right now working on the inaugural Otillo swim run event, which will be coming up July 7th. So just a short time away. So he's going to be organizing that event. And his question for you is, what are your top 3 memories from announcing?
Very good question. I sure wish that event wasn't on the same date as our Peach Classic. I would love to watch that event. Otillos are exciting as well. Difficult to commentate necessarily, but nowadays what I love is the tracking. But if I look at from an announcing perspective, I would definitely say any Ultraman event. any Ironman event that I have been involved with. And if I look at a third event, that I do love some cross-country ski races that have been very exciting to see. Brian McKeever comes to mind. We have the Reino Vasaloppet up in Salmon Arm, and he's a gentleman who's won all sorts of medals in Paralympics. He is visually impaired, so that's why he's in the Paralympics. But he won their race outright one year. So to have the privilege of seeing that, when all he sees is like black and white shadows, basically, and for him to be that fit, be that fast, and take overall victories in an event, is magnificent to see. I would love to see something like the Vasaloppet. I'd love to commentate there, where they have like 17 to 20,000 skiers. But the other thing that I've really enjoyed over the years is a couple of times we've been the commentators for the World Police and Fire Games, and in those games we've usually done the triathlon and open water swims, mountain biking and stuff. But the open water swims, I think, are equally as exciting as you can make them, and that's why I love doing commentating there too, because there's a difference between being in a pool, and I was fortunate enough to be poolside and commentating at the Commonwealth Games in 1994 in Victoria. And on the final day, Kieran Perkins set a world record at the 1,500 meters, but he also set a world record at the 800 meters en route. So that was exciting. But in open water swims, it always amazes me how sometimes there's nothing going on, meaning there's no music, there's no one on sound system making noise, there's no one telling you who's coming in. That pains me. I love making it as exciting as possible, because it is for me. We recently, our grandson has cerebral palsy, and he is part of a wheelchair basketball team, and they did very well at the games last couple of years, and we went up to watch them. And during the course of it, I'm getting into it, understanding the rules and everything. And I said to my wife, dang, I wish I bought my sound system. I could have been commentating on this, because it was that exciting. It gets to me, there are some events that do that for you, and some events it's blah. So yeah, I'm passionate, and hopefully answered the question about 3. I probably gave 5 different events there that I really love, but they're the ones I'm passionate about.
Yeah. And thanks for that question as well.
Mm-hmm.
Another person who you recognize has sent in a question for me, and you've been on his podcast as well a number of times, the FitSpeek Podcast. Kevin Hines, he and I did a crossover episode where we interviewed each other, and then we both released it as part of our podcast library. So he wants to ask you some musical questions, because those of us that know you, we know that you're very into music, you play music, and you enjoy listening to music. So his 2 questions are, number 1, what are your favorite workout songs? And number 2, what are the songs that you are sick of playing while you're announcing?
Oh, great questions. I have 18 hours of recorded music that I play at maybe an Ironman, if they let me. On occasion, they've shut me down and said, that's not the stuff we like to play. Well, I am a 60s person in terms of my favorite music coming from them, but I understand it, and they're certainly entitled to do that. I don't have, when I do a workout, I don't often have music. I don't carry a headset with me or anything. I never do that. But I do sing in my head, and I often sing things that I hate. And by that, I mean, how jingles get into your head and you can't stand them, but you find them going spinning around. So there are some jingles maybe that are pretty fun, but no, given a choice, give me the Stones, the Beatles anytime, Creedence Clearwater. I mean, I love the 60s rock stuff, and then I can space off. I love Moody Blues as well. But I also, I can listen to Eminem and people like that quite comfortably. I like reggae, ska, blue beat, all the stuff that. So I love a gamut of music, and that's what I try to share with people when I'm providing the music.
Excellent. Yeah, those are great questions. All right. Next question then. I'm going to go back over to Australia. I was hoping this person was going to be able to join us, so I kind of held off on it, but it doesn't look like she's going to be able to. She's been doing a little bit of work with Tim Franklin, by the way, as he starts running into the finish line. He's agreed to come on the podcast after he finishes his run as well. So I'll probably have him coming up toward the end of the year. He finishes on June the 30th in Brisbane, and he's been inviting people to come out and finish that last 10K with him. So people over there, I'm sure you're lining up to go do that. And this question is going to come from Gail Locks. And she actually has two questions. She has a statement and two questions. So I'll just read it as she's written it for you. Steve King, your knowledge is incredible, and you have met and interviewed so many athletes over the years. We have all benefited and still are from your knowledge. What is the most interesting advice you have heard through your interviews? I'll give you that one first, and I'll come back to the second one.
Okay. And what I would say to that is focus on what you can do, not on what you can't do. Because that also means to me that you're the world's leading authority on yourself, and you know how you operate. And that means you've got to sometimes go to the internal coach. In fact, I often will use just the word coach when I'm stuck with something, even with a client. You know, if I'm feeling like I'm not sure what the next move should be, or if I was in a race and if I was suffering a bit, or feeling like things weren't going too well, I would often say to myself, Coach, what do I need to do? And so a lot of people, especially in the sport of triathlon now, do have coaches. So on the literal side, you could ask coach in terms of performance, but in terms of maybe what your body or your mind are doing, I would say you're the leading expert there. So you've got the internal coach and the external coach. And I would say call upon that, name it, so you can call upon it at any given time. I had an experience in 1997. I think it was the very first time the Haney to Harrison relay opened up to soloists doing the 100K. I entered the event, and I moved into first place just beyond 50K, or just before 50K. Yeah, I remember that. There was one toilet around the 50K mark. I'm looking forward to it because I can see it ahead of me. I just moved into the lead. And as I'm getting closer to this washroom, it was a portaloo, a volunteer goes running in there. And I'm yelling, please, let me in, let me in, let me in. And the person wouldn't. Obviously, they needed it as much as I did. So I had to stand outside for like 5 minutes. And this person, another runner, came past me in that time. Anyway, it was sort of funny afterwards, but it wasn't funny at the time because I'm desperate to get going again. So I got going again. And about 7 kilometers later, I didn't feel well. Something was amiss. So I literally inside, I said, Coach, what do I need to do? And very quickly, I was sort of reminded, grab this, grab that, you know, because I had a crew. My stepson was there, so he was able to give me some liquids and something, cookie or something. And very, very quickly it said, ease down, get the pace going again, and boom, you know, see how it unfolds, sort of thing. And I ended up doing very well. I won the race, and we had people like Ferg Hawk, one of my heroes. He was there. He was second that year. And so it turned out that we set a benchmark for people. Unfortunately, that event is no longer going. So, you know, it's sad sometimes when you lose some of the great events, but now they host one of those type of events up at Whistler.
Yeah, yeah. So her question was, what is the most interesting advice you have heard through your interviews? So did you hear that advice from someone else?
Rick Hansen.
Rick. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So I don't need to say more, I hope. Everyone should know the man in motion himself.
Yes. Yeah. And then during that question, you also touched on something else that I want to jump into just before I go on to our second question. You were talking about your day job. And so probably everybody who knows you knows that you are a clinical psychologist, and you're helping a lot of people. And that's really where one of your other passions. And recently you released a PTSD app to help people that could get help all over the place. So you wouldn't have to necessarily just see them yourself. You and a crew of people work together on that. How's that been going? And maybe just drop the name of that again in case somebody, you know, out there needs to use that as a resource.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. It's called the detachmenttechnique.com. You can find out all about it. It's on the website, and it's to assist anybody, even though we talk about first responders there because a number of the people that are involved with us are first responders, but it is available for anybody, and it's a speedy way of literally collapsing the disturbances, the images, and the emotions connected to trauma. And the app is on there. It's a free app. We are a non-profit that we formed for the purpose of getting this out there. It's going slowly. It's hard to get your foot in the door fully, but the clients I work with, I'm seeing lots of success ongoingly. And I just hope we can get clinical trials going. We have Dr. Lee Blaney, who's working with us as well. That's she's put in an application to get clinical trials done, and we hope that can happen this summer, in fact. So we're very much on the ball as far as we can be, but it's not easy to get something going that's quite new, because there's plenty of people involved in the field and plenty of people, sadly, who need this. And so all that matters to me is it gets to those that it can. If that's one person or 10,000 or 100,000 or 1 million, the important thing is to have things available for people so they don't have to live longer with the disturbances and the overwhelm that it can cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for people that are going to be signing up for Ultra Tri Fest in Whistler, there is also on the sign up page, we have a spot for them to make a donation to your nonprofit to help keep that going as well. So just my way of showing my support to you and what you do, and as a thank you for all you do for the ultra community and for this podcast, because you come on so many times. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry. Appreciate it.
And now I'll go back to Gail's second question. So this one sounds very specific. There will be one athlete in particular that will stand out for a reason that had a background that surprised you. What was that reason?
Background that surprised me. Wow. I've had lots of people with backgrounds that surprise me. Are you able to give me another clue?
That's she just wrote the question and then
background that surprised me. I'd love to know who she's referring to there, because when I look at who's listening in here, every one of you has surprised me in a positive way. And there are some people who surprise you in weird, wacky ways in terms of their occupations or what they've done previously or where they've come from. I can't think who she's referring to. I'd love for her to come on and just give me an extra clue on that. I mean, Tim Franklin comes to mind in terms of what he's about to achieve and his background. I mean, if you go online, it's interesting when he talks about, where he was at 20 years ago or something and where he's at today. And I'd love to be there to see him coming in. I hope they've got someone commentating of that when he does his final kilometer or so, or maybe a lot more. My guess would be there will be a whole host of people closing on through. But I think probably Shane Duffy, maybe she's referring to as well, having done half a dozen and Guinness Book of Records, getting into that, and deservedly so. Again, if I knew it a little more, because there's so many incredible people in the sport that I'm sorry I can't be specific there, Gail.
Okay. I had another question for you, and that is because I know you do watch a number of different sports and things like that, and you follow the families of the people that are involved. Earlier on, we had a question from Peter Verbruzek, and I'm wondering, have you been following along with what he's doing within his own family? He's training up like the next generation of these people. His son, in particular, has been doing like amazingly well at a bunch of races, and together they just raced their first 70.3. I think he just became of age to do a 70.3. Have you been following along with Philip's progress?
I just think that's wonderful when you see some of the greats over the years that have done so very well that their kids are involved. Arnaud is another person who we've seen, the Frenchman who won Australia. In fact, at one point, his young son, Mika, is just doing amazing things as well. So it's nice to see the next generation coming up. Now, whether they'll choose to do ultras or not is something else, because we all know how special it is to do your first triathlon, to do the first standard or Olympic distance, or to complete a 70.3 or Ironman. But to go up to the Ultraman distance does require something different in terms of your ability to take out the time necessary, the perseverance necessary, the finances necessary. And so I think all those elements can come to be when you're, say, Peter Vaprashek's son. Of course, you've got some benefits there. He has the ability to coach. He has the ability to organize races, get sponsors, and is well known. So he can draw in the collective community that is required to host these events as well. But I also think he's wise enough, because obviously the genetics are very good there in the family system, because I know he's got brothers who are rowers and stuff like that, have performed at high levels. And so it's interesting the sports that people were doing before they got in. Quite a few of the athletes are also into winter sports.
Right.
And so when you can do cross training like that, it really is helpful, especially in countries where the winters are quite severe. We're fortunate in the Okanagan Valley. You could pretty much cycle most year round. It would be nippy for quite a while, but in Vancouver, you're going to be in the rain quite a bit and be a bit windy, but we can do these things. Unfortunately, it looks like Kit's Pool is going to be closed for a while there now. Yeah. So Matty will have to find a different location to do his swimming. But Rick is lucky enough to live in the Austin area, where they have gorgeous weather and great people and great organizations, great events and great music. So this is the other thing about this sport, is the locations. If you look at, Florida, Arizona, Canada, Hawaii, wherever it may be now that people are hosting these events, they're gorgeous spots. Noosa, one of the nicest places you could ever visit in Australia. So I would urge people to start to look around and think in terms of, if you've got family involved, even if they're into the sport or if they're willing to come and crew, you might as well make a holiday of it as well, unless you're right there in the location. And if you're lucky enough to live in one of the locations, then it's like down the road, you're going to regret not doing a certain event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I've been trying to follow along with Philip as well, because he posts a lot about them. And, they've done Otillos, they've done swim runs together and things like that. And I think they were really happy to do that first Ironman together. Mm-hmm. And just so that you have a little bit more, because, I know you like to put this stuff in the bank. He's got a 10,000 meter time now, Philip, of 32:57. So you can put that in and start thinking about his intro when he shows up at one of these races. And I know absolutely. For Peter, one of the other things when I talked to him before is he wants to stay fit enough and healthy enough that he can also, get to do races with his youngest child, Vera, as well. So
that would be neat.
Yeah.
Well, when you think of, people who have run and people who understand the nature of what's going on out there, where you've got people doing 2:35 marathons, and you look at some of the amazing splits that have been recorded, say a double marathon at the end of an Ultraman on that final day, to think there are two people who have gone sub 6 hours on the Big Island, for instance. Peter Cotland's amazing 5:33, Eric Seedhouse's 5:57 clocking. You break the splits up with the swims, the bike, and the run at the end of it, when you think you've already done 2 days of very hard and long distance, and often in the heat of the day as well. It speaks volumes about the caliber and talent that these athletes have. But we also have to remember, the good thing is, you don't have to be one of those guys. You can still be someone who gets inside 17 hours or gets inside 36 hours for an Ultraman. You've got to determine for yourself who is your competition, because often your competition is yourself, and you want to just improve on who you were last year in whatever capacity, whether that's as a philanthropist, a community giver, a volunteer, a race organizer, director, or an athlete. It's how can we improve the quality of life for ourselves as well as those around us, including our families.
Absolutely. Well, we've got two people that are still hanging around on this Zoom call, so I think they deserve to get to ask one more question each at least. So, Rick, you've been shaking your head at a lot of this stuff. Come on, give us another one.
Yeah, you definitely. Well, I want to add to Steve's. Someone asked him about how do you remember all these people at races when they come across. Well, I can tell you how he does it. Part of his technique is,
Don't give away any secrets.
I've been his roommate on several occasions, and me preparing for my photography, and Steve preparing for his race announcing. First of all, he spends hours and hours and hours. People don't see him working behind the scenes. Now, what he does that impresses me of those is, now I can speak from a race organizer standpoint because I hired him 3 times. What he asks for, part of the deal, is we have to prepare him by having printouts of every single name with the hometown and who who they are. I think part of it is there's a comment or two about, how you fill out a race application and asks you what special things, and it's for the race announcer. Well, so I watched Steve get these poster boards, in Austin. I furnished him with these big poster boards, and he tapes these sheets with all the names, all of numbers, and he has this long table with all that pasted down. And on top of that, I had to furnish him with clear in case it rains, right? So he's prepared. Now that's if the computer breaks down. So he's got that as a backup. Mm-hmm. And he's got Gene there in some cases, pointing here and there and all that. But Steve, people don't see all this stuff you do, getting ready. They just think it's all walking up to the stand and doing a race announcing. Well, I can speak from experience on several occasions, these other things that you do. And I'm just glad you never upped your appearance fee on me.
No, and it's funny you should mention those sheets. I still use my sheets, Rick, funny enough. Yeah. And I have had so many race directors or others say, why do you bother nowadays with computers? You wouldn't believe how many times I have to go to those sheets where something's gone down or it's not functioning well for whatever reason, because signals aren't the best in some locations. So it's amazing how many times I have to revert to them. So I'm glad I still keep them.
Well, and I got one question for you. That was more of a comment. Do you recall the time that we were in Wales, North Wales, at that hotel at what's it called?
Betsy Coed.
Betsy Coed. I was doing my photography stuff on the computer, and you were doing your whatever you do, preparing for the race announcing. Well, you had taken a break and you were on the bed sleeping. Okay?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm working up to?
No,
you don't.
But go there.
Well, I just I let go with this huge fart, right? And I thought he was like right next to me. And he turned out his bunk bed was like right behind me and pretty close to my butt. So, I felt so bad, but I wouldn't be able to tell that story. And you yelled out, "Tricky, tricky."
I have to point out they were very small rooms there. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, Matt.
Thank you.
Matt, Please clean it up a little bit for us. What do you got?
Wow. How do you go from that? Oh my God, I love it. Yeah, it's like tricky. Oh, thanks for that.
I better mute.
Well, I go back to that same theme, Steve. Do you remember what first race it was, or that moment for you where it was like something happened that then it's now why we're talking about your incredible ability to impact people by wanting to recognize them in an athletic event, or like, was there like?
Yeah, I think I can. I appreciate you. That's a good question, Maddie. You may remember how when Ironman Canada finished, people would stay in the hotel lobby at the lakeside to sign up for the very next year, because that's how popular it was. People would camp outside, but literally bodies, and they allowed it in the hotel. People would sleep right outside where you'd have to register the very next day. So the very next day, after the event, and it was a very successful race. This would have been probably 1986, I think, when it was first Ironman Canada, officially Ironman Canada. And that's when Rick and Dick Hoyt were there, amongst others. And we had that tremendous finish with thousands of people staying around. I walked in to the lobby, and there were a lot of friends there, or people I knew, and people just started clapping. Like, I'm walking through and they were clapping at me. And that sort of just, it gave me goosebumps. And I thought, well, hold on. People realized, I was doing something up there, or that they connected me to the voice at the finish line and obviously appreciated it. And so many pats on the back and things like that, that then I realized, okay, this is something that I just want to continue to embrace and enjoy, because, if I can make people feel special, because they are, it seemed natural. And then, anyway, it was just such a neat thing. And then to get with CBC and different TV productions. And I love that too, being in front of a screen, just going as though you were sitting at home watching the TV, but this is actually being recorded. It's a very neat thing to be able to do, as I know you're well aware of yourself.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, no, that is a big deal, because like you say, it's like that connection of human beings going like, oh, and then they're just like, yeah, and you're like, what? Me? What do you say? Oh my God. Okay. And
Thanks.
Well, thanks for continuing.
You betcha. Great question. And look forward to seeing you soon for the Grand Fondo.
Jeff, you're 12.
Steve, I really appreciate the time that you've given today, and the thought that you've given to all of these different questions from all your friends from the past that wrote in and voice recorded and video recorded and joined us here on the Zoom. So if there are other people out there that have questions for Steve King, you know what? I bet you he could answer them again. Send me some questions, and if I build up enough of them, maybe we'll do another. Hey, Steve King, let's get together and answer some of these fans' questions, because you do a great job of it. You always have the answer and the time and the date, and people love that about you. And you put all of that into your answers today again, and I really appreciate it, and the time. So and all the people that joined us and sent in questions, thank you very much as well. It's been my pleasure to be able to host this Ask Me Anything with you, Steve, and thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Larry. Great questions, and thanks for those who've turned up, dear friends. We miss you, and look forward to seeing you again at the races. So try to keep fit, everybody.
Hey, if you liked what you heard today, please tell a friend, and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd appreciate it if you'd rate and review the show while you're there. Drop the names of the people you think we should interview, and we'll get in touch with them and make that happen. Thank you for listening to 515, the Ultra Podcast, a production of 55 Enterprises. No, really, go subscribe now before you forget.
Big love for Steve, and he knows it. Lot of respect. I'll leave you with one story about Steve. He used to invite athletes over to his place in Penticton, and one year he was hosting Cowman. It was the first time I'd actually physically met him. I'd seen him in Hawaii, but the first time I met him, Cowman I think he was staying with Steve. Anyway, Steve invited him to have something to eat. Cowman emptied his fridge of everything. I saw him later that day. He had a big Tupperware jar. He had a big Tupperware basket on his bike, and he was downtown signing autographs for the kids. That was all Steve's food. He emptied his. There's another question. What'd you think of that?